Ted Bundy walked up to the young woman outside the university library, his arm in a sling, struggling with his own stack of books, flashing that $1 million smile. "Excuse me," he said. "Could you help me carry these to my car? I can't manage with this cast." She looked at his handsome face, his clean-cut appearance, his obvious vulnerability. Of course she could help. History's most notorious serial killers weren't the wild-eyed maniacs from horror movies. They were the charming neighbor, the trusted doctor, the helpful stranger asking for directions. And their methods? So devastatingly effective they fooled everyone, including the cops, for years, sometimes decades. Here's how 5 of history's most prolific killers turned trust into a weapon. Ted Bundy cracked the code on something we'd all rather not think about. We're hardwired to help people who seem vulnerable, and he weaponized that instinct like a surgeon. The fake injury was Bundy's signature, cast on his arm, crutches, sling, all carefully crafted props in his theater of death. He'd position himself near his Volkswagen Beetle with the passenger seat removed, struggling theatrically with books or boxes. When a young woman approached to help, he'd guide her toward his car, then strike with a crowbar the moment she was close enough. But the physical props were just window dressing. Bundy's real weapon was looking exactly like someone you'd want to date. 6 feet tall, dark-haired, conventionally handsome, every mother's dream son-in-law. He drove that trustworthy little Beetle, dressed well, spoke with the educated accent of someone who belonged on a college campus. Because that's exactly where he was hunting. Bundy deliberately targeted university areas, blending seamlessly into the academic environment. Right age, right look, right car. When he approached a co-ed, he didn't register as a threat. He registered as a peer. Someone safe. Someone who might even ask you out for coffee later. What made Bundy particularly dangerous was his complete lack of remorse combined with his sophisticated manipulation tactics. He'd study his victims beforehand, learning their routines and vulnerabilities. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated predation, disguised as chance encounters. Bundy eventually confessed to 30 murders across multiple states, though investigators believe the actual number was much higher. He operated for over 4 years before his final capture, leaving a trail of devastated families who trusted the wrong, helpful stranger. While Bundy hunted on college campuses, Jeffrey Dahmer trolled the gay bars and shopping malls of Milwaukee, fishing for a very different kind of victim. His bait wasn't fake vulnerability, it was real loneliness. Dahmer's method was almost absurdly simple. He'd approach young men, usually minorities, in bars or public spaces and strike up conversations. Friendly, engaging, seemingly harmless. He'd offer them money to come back to his apartment for photos or just for beer and company. For many of his victims, runaways, hustlers, men struggling with their sexuality in an unforgiving world, Dahmer represented something rare: acceptance without judgment. What they found instead was a chamber of horrors. Once inside his apartment, Dahmer would drug their drinks with sleeping pills. When they passed out, he'd strangle them, then begin the grotesque ritual that would make him one of history's most disturbing killers. He'd kill them, then dismember the bodies, keeping skulls as trophies. Dahmer's stated motivation was a desperate desire for control and companionship. He wanted to create compliant partners who would never leave him. In his warped psychology, murder was the ultimate form of possession. If he couldn't keep them alive, he'd keep parts of them forever. His apartment became a museum of death. When police finally searched it, they discovered evidence of his horrific crimes throughout, a scene so disturbing that seasoned investigators needed counseling afterward. He'd attempted to create compliant victims by drilling holes in their skulls and pouring various substances into their brains. The most horrifying near miss came in May 1991, when 14-year-old Konorak Synthesumphone escaped Dahmer's apartment, naked and bleeding from a hole drilled in his skull. But when police arrived, Dahmer convinced them the boy was his 19-year-old boyfriend who'd had too much to drink. The officers actually helped Dahmer carry the semi-conscious boy back to the apartment, where Dahmer murdered him within hours. It wasn't until July 1991 that another intended victim, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape with handcuffs still dangling from his wrist and flag down police. When officers finally entered Dahmer's apartment, they discovered the full scope of his 17-victim killing spree. Dahmer received 16 life sentences. He was beaten to death by a fellow inmate in 1994. Dr. Harold Shipman was the most trusted man in Hyde, England. For decades, he was known as the Good Doctor, always willing to make house calls, especially to his elderly patients. Warm bedside manner, reassuring presence, complete confidence of the community. He was also Britain's most prolific serial killer. Shipman had perfected the art of invisible murder. He'd visit elderly patients at home, ostensibly to treat minor ailments. Then he'd inject them with lethal doses of morphine, alter their medical records to suggest they'd been gravely ill, and encourage families to choose cremation over burial to destroy any evidence. The genius of Shipman's scheme was its complete invisibility. His victims were already old and frail. When they died suddenly, it seemed natural. Tragic, but natural. And who would suspect the kindly family doctor who'd cared for them so devotedly? Shipman wasn't killing for money or sexual gratification. It was pure power. He enjoyed playing God, deciding who lived and who died. The ultimate control freak in a white coat, getting his kicks from the drama of life and death decisions. His victims were predominantly elderly women, though he also killed some male patients and even a 4-year-old child. He'd been murdering for decades, potentially since the 1970s, racking up a body count that investigators believe reached 250 people. What finally brought him down? His own arrogance. In 1998, he killed 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy and forged her will to leave him £386,000. But Grundy's daughter was a lawyer who immediately smelled something fishy and demanded an investigation. When they dug up Grundy's body, it was loaded with morphine. That opened the floodgates. Suddenly, investigators were looking at decades of suspicious deaths, all with the good doctor's fingerprints on them. The inquiry that followed painted a picture of industrial-scale murder hiding behind a stethoscope and a reassuring smile. Shipman hanged himself in his prison cell in 2004, taking his secrets with him to the grave. By day, John Wayne Gacy was a pillar of his Chicago suburb community. He ran a successful construction company, threw elaborate parties, and entertained children at hospitals dressed as Pogo the Clown. By night, he was luring young men to his home and burying their bodies in his crawl space. Gacy's hunting ground was Chicago's gay neighborhoods and bars, where he'd cruise for victims among vulnerable young men. His pitch was straightforward: construction work or just drinks at his place. Many of his victims were runaways or hustlers, people who wouldn't be immediately missed. Once at his house, Gacy would overpower his victims, often using what he called his rope trick, a tourniquet device that could strangle someone in seconds. He'd then bury the bodies in the crawl space beneath his house, in his backyard, or dump them in nearby rivers. The whole operation unraveled in December 1978, when 15-year-old Robert Peast disappeared after telling his mother he was going to see a contractor about a job. The contractor was Gacy. When police searched his property, they discovered he'd been literally living on top of a graveyard of his own making. 26 bodies were found buried on Gacy's property, with more recovered from local waterways. The smell from the crawl space was so overwhelming that investigators had to work in shifts. Imagine coming home every day to that stench and just carrying on with your life. Gacy showed no remorse, claiming the victims were worthless and deserved to die. He was executed by lethal injection in 1994, but not before becoming one of America's most infamous serial killers. Gary Ridgway was the opposite of the charming, sophisticated killers who came before him. With an IQ of just 82, he was often dismissed as too simple to be dangerous. That underestimation allowed him to become the most prolific serial killer in American history. Ridgway's hunting ground was the SeaTac Strip near Seattle, where he'd pick up sex workers in his pickup truck. His approach was direct. He'd offer money for sex, drive them to secluded areas, then strangle them during or after the encounter. He specifically targeted prostitutes because he knew they were less likely to be immediately missed, and that police investigations would be less thorough. What made Ridgway so dangerous wasn't intelligence. It was persistence and paranoia. He'd return to dump sites to move bodies and contaminate evidence. He'd place rocks in victims' vaginas to make it harder for investigators to collect DNA evidence. He'd dump bodies in clusters, then spread them out to confuse police about the timeline. Ridgway killed for over 2 decades, from the early 1980s until his capture in 2001. His victims were found along the Green River and in wooded areas throughout Washington state, giving him his nickname. At one point, he was killing at such a pace that he claimed to have forgotten some of his victims entirely. The investigation became one of the longest and most expensive in American history. When DNA technology finally caught up to him in 2001, Ridgway found himself staring down the death penalty. Suddenly, the man who'd forgotten his victims had perfect recall. He traded confessions for life imprisonment. In those confessions, Ridgway revealed the chilling banality of his murders. He killed, he said, because he hated prostitutes, but couldn't stop using their services. Murder was his way of cleaning up the streets while satisfying his sexual urges. He confessed to 71 murders, though investigators believe the real number could be over 90. What'll really mess with your head about these killers isn't the violence, it's how ordinary they seem. Bundy looked like a law student, because he was one. Shipman acted like a caring doctor, because that's what everyone expected. Gacy seemed like a successful businessman, because he was successful. Dahmer appeared lonely and harmless, because, in many ways, he was. They succeeded not despite their normalcy, but because of it. They understood that we judge threat by appearance, that we trust people who look like us, sound like us, belong in our spaces. They weaponized our basic human instinct to help those who seem vulnerable or trustworthy. And perhaps most chillingly, they remind us that the greatest monsters aren't the ones who look like monsters. They're the ones who look like the person you'd help carry groceries to their car. The ones who make you think, even as they're leading you into the darkness, that you're doing the right thing. The next time someone asks for help, you'll probably still say yes, because that's what decent people do. But maybe, just maybe, you'll remember Ted Bundy's sling and trust your instincts a little more carefully. After all, the most dangerous predators are the ones who've learned to look like prey.